The government deregisters a primary school teacher over allegations of spreading pro-independence messages through teaching materials and worksheets. Social distancing measures extended for 1 week as the city reports 5 more locally acquired coronavirus infections.
Now I'm better, and maybe I'm immune, I don't know. But don't let it dominate your lives. Get out there, be careful.
Donald Trump returns to the White House after a 3-night hospital stay for treatment of COVID-19.
Hello and a very good evening. For the first time in Hong Kong, a teacher has been deregistered for allegedly spreading pro-Hong Kong independence messages in his schoolwork.
The Education Bureau's move has effectively stripped the teacher of his license to serve in any local schools. Here's Jackie Lin.
It's an unprecedented move against a primary school teacher who's said to have made pro-independent teaching materials and worksheets last year. He was said to have shown a recorded interview with advocates of Hong Kong independence and discussed issues related to separatist activities in Tibet, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. The administration rushed to defend the decision, calling it a serious professional misconduct.
If there are very tiny faction of teachers who are using their teaching responsibilities to convey wrong messages, to promote misunderstanding about the nation, to smear the country and the Hong Kong SAR government without basis, then that becomes a very serious matter.
What we are now doing is to protect the interests of our students. There's nothing. There's not so ever anything about any chilling effect. We don't believe in that.
While the Alliance Primary School, where the teacher in question has been terminated from duty, reiterated its political neutrality, some parents find the education authorities overreacted. Like him, who said these critical issues should be given room for discussion in class. This parent too said the mere mention of Hong Kong independence in teaching doesn't mean the idea was advocated, and kids should be able to see the difference. A similar sentiment from a teachers' union.
It's not so much about the Hong Kong independence issue. This is just an example to illustrate what is about in freedom of speech. So I think the government has made a very, very wrong judgment on that and has put a very, very harsh punishment on the teacher. This is totally unfair.
The union is planning to assist the teacher to make an appeal. The Education Bureau has received about 250 social movement-related complaints about teachers. 200-odd have been investigated and around 1/3 have been found to be unsubstantiated. So far, 21 teachers have received letters of reprimand. They could also suffer the same fate of deregistration if they repeat the offense. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Hong Kong reported 8 COVID-19 cases today, with 5 being locally acquired.
Most existing social distancing measures will now be extended. Pinky Wong has the details.
2 local cases are linked to previous infections. They include a 35-year-old female who lived at Holy Mansion in Tsim Sha Tsui with a previous patient. The other one is a 21-year-old male who is a close contact of an imported case. The 3 local cases with unknown sources are all men. They include a 43-year-old waiter who last worked in a Vietnamese restaurant at the Royal Garden Hotel in Tsim Sha Tsui on October 3rd. He lives in Fa Sin Mansion in Wan Chai.
The staff in the Royal Garden, the restaurant, and he's wearing masks and has performed hand hygiene during the work, but still we don't know the risk. It's difficult to assess because it all depends on the personal hygiene and so on. So that's why we are arranging the customers to have tested.
The restaurant will be closed for 14 days. Another case is a 33-year-old unemployed man who lives in Wealthy Court in North Point. He attended a family gathering with 16 relatives on October 1st, went to a Taiku cinema the next day, and felt unwell on October 3rd. All 16 of his relatives will be sent to quarantine centers. The last case is a 22-year-old student who lives in Lungmun Oasis in Tuen Mun. He first came down with a fever on October 1st. The student frequently visits a gym and multiple restaurants in the neighborhood. The 3 imported cases are from the Philippines, Germany, and Russia. Officials earlier announced measures like mandatory mask wearing and prohibition of group gatherings of no more than 4 people will be extended.
There are these unlinked cases that we found in the past 1 or 2 weeks. We do not want the 4th wave to come unnecessarily early because we have not maintain vigilant in terms of our social distancing measures, and because in the past weekend everybody because of the fatigue have been coming out and also relaxing a little bit, which is understandable and probably inevitable, but I would like to appeal to the public in terms of maintaining vigilance and also their own personal hygiene and social distancing, because the risk of further outbreak would be increased if there are more gatherings.
Separately, the Royal Thai Consul General in Hong Kong started giving out specimen bottles to Thai citizens in the city, as some had earlier tested positive for the virus. Peng Wong, TVB News.
U.S. President Donald Trump staged a dramatic return to the White House after leaving the hospital where he was receiving an unprecedented level of care for COVID-19.
And he immediately ignited a new controversy by declaring that despite his illness, America should not fear the virus that has killed hundreds of thousands in his country.
Show no weakness and maintain the appearance of strength seems to be Trump's way of doing things and handling his potentially life-threatening diagnosis of COVID-19. After being released from hospital, Trump arrived at the White House in a made-for-television spectacle. He emerged from his helicopter wearing his mask, only to symbolically discard it as he waved, saluted and posed from the balcony in a show of bravado. Then he went on to tell people not to fear COVID, despite it killing more than 209,000 Americans this year.
I know there's a risk, there's a danger, but that's okay. And now I'm better, and maybe I'm immune, I don't know. But don't let it dominate your lives. Get out there, be careful. We have the best medicines in the world.
Still, his doctors couldn't say when Trump would no longer be contagious or when he'd be able to travel and go on the campaign trail again. His personal physician admitted the president was not out of the woods yet, but would be monitored closely. One analyst felt Trump was playing a cynical game in trying to rush back to work while downplaying the impact the coronavirus had on him.
The president may be well enough now to come back. He may have turned the corner on the virus, time will tell, but that comes after he had 72 hours of the very best medical care available to anyone in the world at a state-of-the-art hospital getting experimental medication. Most COVID-19 patients have access to none of that. And I think that it shows a disconnect perhaps between his experience and those around the nation, and again, may fuel into this idea that the president is downplaying the threat of this virus.
Trump's arrival back at the White House is also raising new questions about how the administration is going to protect other officials from a disease that remains rampant in the president's body and seems to be spreading among his staff. White House Press Secretary Kayla McKinney was the latest person in the Trump inner circle to announce she had tested positive for COVID.
Well, as President Trump recovers from the coronavirus, Joe Biden is capitalizing on having the campaign trail largely to himself by hitting critical swing states. In Florida, he sought to contrast Trump's chaotic handling of the pandemic with his own detailed plan for tackling the crisis. Democratic presidential nominee made his second trip to Florida in a little over 2 weeks on Monday. His visit was designed to encroach on some of Trump's turf and build an advantage in the Electoral College so large that the president might struggle to contest it. And that's important since Trump has refused to say whether he will accept the election results this year.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says he's ordering schools in certain New York City neighborhoods closed within a day in an attempt to halt a flare-up of the coronavirus. The governor took the action a day after Mayor Bill de Blasio asked the state for permission to reinstate restrictions on business and schools in parts of the city where the virus was spreading more quickly. The World Health Organization's head of emergencies said Monday that roughly 1 in 10 people globally may have been infected by the coronavirus.
The comments come as numerous countries report spikes in new COVID cases. Daniel Rao has more details.
Dr. Michael Ryan, head of the WHO's health emergency program, outlined the extent of COVID spread during a coronavirus response session in Geneva on Monday.
Our current best estimates tell us that about 10% of the global population may have been infected by this virus. This varies depending on country, it varies from urban to rural, it varies between different groups.
Dr. Ryan also warned the pandemic may be far from over, despite advancements in treatment and testing protocols. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus also held a moment of silence to commemorate COVID victims, as well as a round of applause for health workers. The session came amid a global infection spike. One of the worst-hit countries in recent weeks has been the UK. The British government has now launched an investigation into how nearly 16,000 new coronavirus infections went unreported as a result of a technical glitch. UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock said 51% of those cases have now been located by contact tracers. This as Westminster reintroduced curbs on business and social gatherings this month. In France, Paris was placed on maximum COVID-19 alert on Monday. This means bars, swimming pools and sports centres must shut down for 2 weeks. Restaurants will have to implement tougher sanitary rules to stay open. The Paris area recorded around 260 infections per 100,000 inhabitants by the end of September. An average of 3,500 new cases were reported each day. Spain registered 2,099 new COVID-19 infections Monday. The country's caseload now stands at 813,412. Intensive care units are being widely used to treat coronavirus patients in Spain's worst-hit regions. In Belgium, the number of new cases reported daily over the last week climbed by 32% to around 2,100 on Monday. Most new infections in the country have been recorded among those aged between 20 and 29 and the elderly. Belgium had only just loosened certain lockdown measures as ministers aimed to prevent further economic damage. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
And still ahead on tonight's news. A fight at a Tsim Sha Tsui bar leaves 1 dead and 3 injured. In Tokyo, Mike Pompeo meets Quad partners to boost ties to counter China. And 3 scientists awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for their work on black holes. And a warm welcome back to TVB News. A fight at a bar in Tsim Sha Tsui in the early hours of today left 1 dead and 3 injured, all employees of the bar.
Police say the case is linked to a triad dispute. The fatal brawl took place outside a building on Austin Road. Bloodstains were left on the wall and the ground. After daybreak, police investigations continued in the cordoned-off area. The bar is located on an upper floor. Officers searched the premises and took away boxes of evidence, including a blood-stained sweeper. Police say at 12:30 a.m., some 20 people from 2 different triad gangs were drinking in the bar. They got into a quarrel and a fight broke out with people attacking each other with hard objects. 4 staff members of the bar were found to be injured by the time the police arrived. A 36-year-old man was already in a coma at that point. He was later certified dead at the hospital. Sources say the bar workers are believed to have triad backgrounds as well. The case has now been classified as murder and wounding. Earlier, there were reports that the fight stemmed from customers being told to leave the bar as current anti-epidemic measures only allow bars to operate until midnight. But during a press briefing this afternoon, police say there's no evidence that the violence had anything to do with the closing time. Officers also stressed that bar gatherings pose high risks to the public, adding the police will proactively inspect entertainment venues and prosecute those who violate the rules.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam has rejected a media report that the police might have helped mainland authorities arrest 12 Hong Kongers in mainland waters back in August. The Apple Daily reported that the flight tracking data it analysed showed a government flying service aircraft circling above the speedboat with the 12 people on board before they were intercepted by the mainland Coast Guard.
A tiny fraction of people have not given up any opportunity to smear the Hong Kong government, to attack the police, to fabricate this and that, and so on. I would not comment on the actual operational details, except to reinforce what the police has said, that the police has absolutely no role to play in this particular case.
Meanwhile, the Junior Police Officers Association filed a complaint with the city's medical watchdog, accusing a pro-democracy legislator of professional and ethical violations. It says Civic Party lawmaker and Dr. Kwok Ka-ki criticised police officers in a social media post, referring to them as green objects and slaves to tyranny. In the letter, the police union slammed Kwok's behaviour, which they claim is not in keeping with the high moral standards expected of medical practitioners. Kwok responded, saying Hong Kongers are entitled to freedom of speech. He also reminded members of the police force to serve rather than oppress citizens.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has met with foreign ministers from Indo-Pacific nations known as the Quad Group in Tokyo.
His talks with some of Washington's closest allies in the Asia-Pacific region aim to shore up support against what the U.S. says is China's growing assertiveness. Leslie Tang has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo touched down in Tokyo shortly after midnight Tuesday. His trip to Asia has been scaled back after U.S. President Donald Trump caught COVID-19. His stopovers in Mongolia and South Korea have been scrapped. Instead, he is meeting with what's called the Quad Group, consisting of the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. The meeting of the Quad comes during a time of tension between these countries and China. Discussed in talks with new Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Initiative aims to counter China's growing assertiveness. It's an issue Pompeo also discussed with the top envoys from Australia and India. A free and open Indo-Pacific, which Japan has been strongly promoting, is now widely promulgating throughout the International Committee as a vision for peace and prosperity of this region, Suga said.
But only add that the Foundation's cornerstone is the U.S.-Japan relationship and the security and prosperity it has provided for our peoples for decades.
The U.S. is hoping to clamp down on what it says is China's dangerous and growing regional influence. Meanwhile, China has denounced the Quad as an attempt to contain its development. Leslie Tang, TVB News.
Hundreds of demonstrators protested against police brutality in the Chilean capital, Santiago. Police armored vehicles launched water beams towards protesters who have been demonstrating since a video circulated showing what appears to be a police officer pushing a boy off a bridge during a protest on Friday. The 16-year-old fell for 7 meters from the bridge to a riverbed, suffering several injuries. The incident is still being investigated, but the police officer suspected of committing the offense has been arrested. The video has caused commotion in a country that is still dealing with human rights violations, which occurred during social unrest last year. Scientists Roger Penrose, Reinhard Genzel and Andrea Ghez have been awarded this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. They were recognized for their work on black holes. Penrose won half the prize for his work using mathematics to prove that black holes are a direct consequence of the general theory of relativity. Genzel and Getz shared the other half for discovering that an invisible and extremely heavy object governs the orbits of stars at the center of our galaxy. That's the news for tonight. Thanks for watching.
Bye for now. Good night.